Quincy Coleman once again from the Black Pride Movement, doing a special part in our 25-part web series, somewhat of a debate or conversation with my boy Wayne here on race relations from the perspective of a Caucasian, African American, Christian, and somewhat of a black nationalist type of religious view. And we want to see if we can't point out or discuss some of the problems and how him and his people feel, and some of the problems with how me and my people feel on the problems that we face today in America. So I want to start by saying I feel like a lot of, of course you could understand how we feel as black people when you see in the news us being shot down and no action being taken against it. And we also feel like we have become a permanent underclass in this country where no matter how high we rise, we're still not respected the way we want to be respected. I was at Savior's Day the other day, and Brother Farrakhan, who was a millionaire and the leader of Nation of Islam, told a story. He said he was at a millionaire's house in New York. He's a white guy. And he said he called him by his first name. He said, white folks, you never reach a high enough level where white folks give you that level of respect that you want. And I think that's how we feel in this country. Like, we've been through so much, and we still can't get, what we need. Yeah. And I want to see how you feel about that and how you feel about what's going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the big, underlying problems behind that is for those of us who grew up in predominantly white areas, especially in the Detroit area, in the suburbs, there's this myth that we live in a post-racial society, that racism ended either with the end of the Civil War or civil rights fixed any of the leftover problems, and now, our generation doesn't have to deal with those problems anymore. And that really reflects the fact that for the average kid growing up in a white suburban house, you're not faced with the narratives that you know on a daily basis. We don't have to experience the things that you've experienced. We don't hear the news stories that you might hear. And for that reason, unless there's an opportunity or moment where we step outside of our cultural bubble, we are not forced to take those problems seriously. And since no one really wants to jump into the mess of somebody else, especially if it's going to mess up their own life,
I think it's important that you say that, because I think, like I was saying earlier, you hear me say the white man is the devil. I don't mean that the devil is that he's a literal devil, because I don't think they're just inherently evil. I think their culture is, if you look through history, inherently evil. But I do think that it's not so much they're sitting at a table somewhere saying, how do we destroy this group of people? But I think it's so much, if we help this group of people, we can't, because we're going to lose out. They've gotten so used to white privilege, as you said, that they don't want to deal with it because it'll take away from their success,
Yeah, it's true. And that's for those who even recognize the injustice and the discrepancies.
And some don't.
Because it takes work to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and recognize that. And not everyone feels the need to go through that work. So I would say that, because you're right, it perpetuates this system that keeps, for instance, your family at a certain place that my family would be able to surpass. So it perpetuates that injustice and perpetuates what is really an evil system.
And it's not, when you say suburbs, I want to make everybody clear, it's not an economic thing, because you can have as much money as you want. You come from a very well-off family, and it doesn't matter. You can never get out of your situation with money, just because you are rich, just because you have a nigga with a degree, as they say, is still a nigga with a degree, You can be as rich as you want, but to them, or to the system, you'll never be looked at as, like Henry Gates. He was a Harvard professor. He tried to get in his house. The police arrested him. He said, this is my house. They said, no, you don't live here. You remember that story? Obama had them both to the White House for tea. So you have to understand it's not an economic thing. It's not a suburb Detroit thing. I think it's more of a, and I see what you mean, where the suburbs could play a role because you're separate.
Right.
But it's not
that's more what I'm getting at.
But it's not a wealth or poverty thing. It's a racial thing.
I mean, the two are intertwined a lot, but yes, I
agree with that, because it helps to have money.
Right.
It helps.
Right.
But it doesn't solve the underlying problem. You can't really buy away the problem. What do you think the solutions are?
Yeah, and this kind of gets more into, the religious influence in all of this for me.
Let me get to my solutions first.
Please.
You'll feed into yours.
Please.
And tell me why you think my solutions are wrong. Okay. Of course. My solution for the black man. There's a couple of solutions, but my major solution is, and I know Wayne heard me talking about it, and he disagrees, and I'm sure everybody will disagree. It's gotten to the point in America, at least in America, in my opinion, where it has gotten so bad where you can shoot a black kid, have a trial, and get off, that black people need to stand up for themselves and use any means they have to stand up for themselves. Because when Trayvon Martin was shot, we marched and everything, you know, that didn't really help. But when Rodney King was beat, we were dragging white folks out of cars and killing them. And then they passed laws to say, okay, police brutality laws right after, as a direct result of that. So people, not just white people, black people, you understand your mama, you do something wrong, your mama hits you. You understand that better than she would, oh, don't do that again. I think it needs to be a swift reaction by the black community. And if it takes violence, it takes violence. Because, we've been trying this. Marcus Garvey tried leaving. Martin Luther King tried being peaceful, you know. And Malcolm didn't really get off the ground with his movement, but, you know, we've never tried. Just like, no, you're not going to treat us that way, because if you kill us, you know, we'll kill you. Dr. Khalid Muhammad, he was a very famous guy. I don't necessarily agree with him, but he said, we need to kill their babies. And I said, why kill their babies? He said, because they're going to grow up to oppress our babies. Because it's a generational thing that it doesn't seem to solve the problem. And it's getting to the point where, you know, when 50% of blacks live in poverty across the country, and when 80% of blacks in the city live in poverty, I mean, what do we really do other than take action, you know? Because if I slap you in the face right now, you're going to hit me back, you know? You're not going to say, well, let's just figure this out, you know? And you might, but if I keep slapping you in the face, you know, what do we do?
Well, that kind of brings up, I mean, I'm sure this is a criticism you've heard before, too. Yeah. Like, if I slap you and you slap me back, I'm unlikely to say, oh, we should probably just stop slapping each other.
Right. Somebody has to kill the other one. You cannot, you're right. That's the point. You cannot coexist with your enemy. Because if you slap me, I slap you, it's going to keep, you know, keep slapping. So, and I hate to see it get that far, because nobody should have to die over anything. As a loss of life is always terrible. But even in, you know, sometimes, you know, you got to.
So where does that end, though?
It ends when one of our races are no longer here.
So just the elimination, and if
genocide.
So I didn't expect that to be your answer. When you have a homogenous society, then if you can commit a kind of genocide that eliminates everything except for one ethnicity, what's to keep that ethnicity from dividing on itself in other ways?
I wouldn't say one ethnicity, brother. I would say the issue. Of course, we have issues with other ethnicities. A black man being oppressed by everybody. Hispanics own slaves, and the Indians own Native Americans own slaves. But the ethnicity that is most destructive to the blacks at this point in time are the people of European descent. So that ethnicity, and I don't mean across the world, I guess, because European countries are still oppressing countries in Africa. So across the world, it needs to be a, you know, that's where, I'm not saying that's where I'm at, that's where most black revolutionaries are at this point, because we feel like you've tried everything. A man marched through white cities and got beat up to try to deal with the problem that way.
Yeah.
And he shot him, they killed him, and then we still not where we should be.
Yeah.
And we got a black president for what, 6 years now? And the condition has still not been improved. It has not been improved. It's not a thing. He's trying, but they're blocking him. You know, the Tea Party Republicans, or conservative Republicans, which is another word for racist, are blocking him. And I'm sure you know that too. And trying to block him everywhere they can. So if we can't do it democratically, what do we do? And in response to your thing about genocide, it's been plenty of times in European history. I know if you heard of Tasmania, where the Europeans have wiped out whole nations. They went into parts of Africa and they wiped out whole tribes. They committed genocide in order to get to where they need to be, because they understood. With the Native Americans, they didn't say we can coexist. They said, okay, we're going to wipe you out. And it's lucky that there's still even a few left. So this has been the European perspective forever.
And it's a bad idea. It was a bad thing for us to have done.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
What do you think?
Yeah, and I do get your frustration. I don't fully understand it because I haven't had to experience it in the same way you have. But so I'm not going to say, here's what I think the black community should do to fix this problem. Because to me, I can only speak to my family.
That's what I agree.
To my
I
neighborhood.
can't speak to your people. I speak
Right.
to my people. You know.
And for me, as far as what should white families do? What should white Americans be doing in the midst of this? For me, that's rooted in my Christian identity. I mean, the Christian story is the story of Jesus, who has the power of God, who is God, setting aside that power for the sake of the oppressed, the marginalized, identifying with their pain and taking out
Which
their
is
pain.
us, right?
Right. And so, for me, as a white Christian, my responsibility is to enter into the pain of people who are unlike myself, to set aside power, prestige, privilege, for the sake of not just saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm suffering for Jesus," but instead saying, "I'm sharing in the suffering of my brothers and sisters."
Like Jesus did.
Right.
I think I was raised as a Christian, and I think that story, although we can debate the origins of that story, and I'm not here to get into that,
Yeah.
is a wonderful story that we all should live by. You know, if it could be lived like that.
Right.
But the problem is, I think as black people, we've been sent to church and said, suffer peacefully, because, you know, Jesus is with you.
Right.
And then we've been the ones that have been getting messed over
Right.
while
And this,
we, you know.
this story isn't even frequently told in
It's not.
white Christian churches.
And it's told in black churches because they don't, like I said, if you ever go to a white church service, it's not the same as ours. They're telling you it's going to get better after a while. Just wait on it. Wait for Jesus to come back.
Mm.
You know, and it's a different.
Right.
And that's why I think Christianity is destructive for blacks. Not because the true story of Christianity is destructive, because it's not. It's one of the most beautiful stories ever.
Mhm.
Jesus is wonderful. But the way it's been taught has been so destructive to black culture through history
Mm.
that I don't think anybody should really follow it. Not because it's not true, but because it's just so destructive.
Right. Well, and it's such a powerful story.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there have been groups who have taken the power of that story and held on to it to support themselves. Instead of following the footsteps of Jesus and saying, any power we have is meant to be poured out for the sake of others. And so, again, coming from my Christian community, coming from the white community, we entirely miss the point of Christianity if we use it to support ourselves and to perpetuate our own comfort.
I agree.
So, again, I can't, and I don't have any interest in telling your family what to do, or your neighborhood what to do. And I don't have influence for good reason to you or to your family. But I can influence my family. I can influence my church. And one of the ways I would like to influence my church is to say, if we're actually going to follow Jesus, we're going to follow Jesus into the city, not to change the city, not to fix the problems, but to see through the eyes of somebody else and to share actually in the suffering of a community that's suffering.
I remember you said to me, if we can kill each other or we can get your family to be hurt when something happens to my
Right,
family.
right.
And I agree with that. I don't want anybody to go out there and kill anybody. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. But I do believe if it keeps going down that road, we're going to have to do something to that effect. I do believe everybody... Pause it.